Now in this lesson, we're going to be talking about techniques for painting trees. And when I say techniques, I don't necessarily mean holding the brush the right way and applying the paint a certain way to make it look like a tree, although that's part of it. It's more about how to see the tree as an artist instead of seeing it like a camera. When we look at these trees, and I'm talking about the trees here on the left, we have to see them a certain way. When we look at the photograph, we see dots. We see spots of light here in the dark area, and we see little dots and spots of dark in the light area. And if we paint it exactly like this, it's going to look like just mashed potatoes. It won't have any strength to it. And whatever I'm painting, my goal is always to suggest what the light's doing to it, and to make it look solid, three-dimensional, standing upright. So we have to, in a way, create an idealized look of this certain tree. Not every tree is going to look the same. We want to think in terms of creating a shape out of what we see that makes it look more three-dimensional, more solid, and makes it stand upright. And three things here. One would be the dark area. I want to create a pattern of dark in here, and I have to make decisions where the edge of the dark is going to be and where the lights are going to be. I can't just, again, copy it exactly as I see it. I got to create definite dark and light shapes, and that simplifies the shapes, makes it easier to paint, easier for the viewer to see. It makes it easier for the values. I can have more definite, simpler values, and that makes it easier for color. So all that works together to make it easier to paint. Maybe simpler would be a better word. It's never easy. But the simple dark and light shapes, and then thirdly, the negative shape of sky back in here, the mountains, whatever's in the background, that goes into creating the shape as well. So again, the dark shape, the light shape, and then the negative shape. But that overall shape is what's real important too. How I design this shape. Do I want to come down a little further? I want to separate this tree here just a bit more with some sky holes. I want to make sure one's bigger or smaller than another tree. There's a lot to consider, but the three things, the three shapes that help me do that, again, is the dark shape, light shape, and then the negative shape of the background or the sky. So I want to think in those terms. And first thing I usually do after getting an idea of the simple mass of the trees is go ahead and, I got both values here, dark and light, but I start with the dark and I create a definite shape. It never looks like the photograph. Sometimes it's close, sometimes it's not. But again, we're designing the shapes of the trees. And it helps to do the thumbnails first, because that's where you're designing them right off the bat. It keeps you from making too many mistakes when you start drawing on the canvas, if I can design these shapes. But I want one overall dark that best represents the shadow, and it's never the darkest accent. It's always kind of the overall dark. And reserve the darkest accent for later, and an overall light, and that's never the lightest light or the highlight. It's kind of a middle light. But when I lay down, when I decide the value of that overall light, I want to be able to go a hair lighter and a hair darker and still be in the light. So in other words, this light area here, this is the light. I can go a little bit darker for the middle value of the light, which is still in the light, and then a highlight. So I can do a couple of more values in there. But the next step then is get at least two values, and usually not more than three, in both the shadow and the sunlight. So here I've got the darker accent, and I put it in the shadow. It's between some of the trees, it's at the base of the trees, and that makes the shadow look transparent. Like you're looking into the shadow to see the darker darks. When I take that out, the shadow is flat. It's just one value. But the minute I make it two values, it becomes a little more three-dimensional. Same thing with the light. I've added a halftone. And this halftone in here, right here, is in the light area. It's not the shadow. It's part of the light. It's just a halftone. It's a darker light. But it can't be as dark as the shadow. And then I can get a lighter light in there for some highlights. But I want to be careful with highlights. This is the value that counts in the light area. Right here. That's the biggest part of the light. This is the biggest part of the dark. And when I break them up and add some other values and colors, I don't want to lose these two main values as the main value for the light and the dark. When I do that, then I kind of lose the, detail takes over. And I lose the overall sense that these are upright. The darkest darks are in the upright. The lightest lights are probably in the rocks or in the sky. So I don't want to move out of this range of this light area. I can add some highlights and halftones, but this overall light that I first put in has to dominate in the light area. After that, I got a little bit of the highlight here in the light areas. I get some other colors in the darks, but it's that simplification, that initial dark and initial light that I start with, that's going to make the painting work or not, or the trees work or not. It's that simplicity. Now I can't soften edges on the computer. I mean, I can, but just way too time consuming. So I'm not thinking here of brush technique, but it's how to see it, how to simplify. I want my trees to look like this and not necessarily like the photograph. There's a time and place, I think, to break it up, make it a little softer looking. But that's going to make the trees work. Getting that design, that definite shape of the big mass of the trees, separate the simple dark and light, and then break it up a little bit. I have one more thought on this, on these. When you get these, don't hesitate to crop them. Make this more of a tree study. Don't worry necessarily too much about a full composition. You don't necessarily want a bad composition ever, but make the trees more dominant. Make that your focal point. That way you're not spending so much time and a lot of extra background or foreground. So on this one, same thing here. You can crop these however you want. Just try and keep the tree out of dead center. But same thing here. This one has a bit more solidity to it. It's always the type of tree. Some trees are going to look more solid, some aren't. This one looks a little more solid. I don't know too much about types of trees. I consider that kind of a good thing. If I knew too much about individual trees, I'd probably think more about making them look like that certain type of tree. It's kind of like flowers. To me, they're just shapes and color. Same thing with trees. I mean, it does help to have some knowledge of them, but I'm not overly concerned about making my tree, in this case, I don't know, this looks like a cottonwood, making sure it's a definite cottonwood. But this one, you can see the edge between the dark and light a lot better. It's a lot more definite. And if I squint a little bit, I can see it better also. But I want to find that shadow pattern and light pattern. This simplifies it, and right away it gives me light direction, and it gives me, in this case, a strong sense of light. On a cloudy day, there wouldn't be as hard an edge or a bigger contrast between the light and dark. The lights would be a little more halftone, and the darks wouldn't be quite as dark, and there wouldn't be that big separation between them. But this is sunlit. And I don't want my painting to look like this. I want it to look more like that. So even if for a while the edges between the light and dark are too hard, at least you're making your tree look more sunlit and more three-dimensional because you're separating the darks and the lights. And I was real careful with the shape of this dark, leaving out some of the little darks, pulling some of the smaller darks together to create bigger shapes. And I've created a design on this tree with the dark and light that's going to make it work. So it's not copying it exactly. It's designing it to make it work better than what the photograph does. And then same thing here. I've got on top of the light, I've got a halftone here And then I've got a highlight. So this is my light green, halftone green, and then the highlight. So I've got 3 values there, and I've got 2 values in the shadow, the overall dark and the darker dark. Usually the shadows are a lot simpler. You don't see as much value change or color change. And I've decided to make these trees on the top, the leaves slightly lighter in the light area. And as they come down, they're just going to gradually get a little darker. And that value change in the light from top to bottom creates a bit more depth and more interest in the tree. Keeps it from looking flat. Now this one, we're talking about pine trees here. And pine trees are just like any other tree. I don't want to have to copy it exactly. They do have a more definite shape to them as opposed to cottonwoods or elm trees or whatever other type of tree. I know they're pine, they're evergreen, they don't drop leaves, they're needles. So they have a more definite shape. Stay away from that just Christmas tree look. You know, the same on both sides, trunk dead center. Pine trees have that varied look. So I might get this shape here, maybe lose that limb there, and then have and of course this one's in front here. Again, I want to vary it. I usually want the foliage or the limbs to sink in on one side and go out on the other. You know, vary those shapes so they're not the same. But the same thing here, I want to design the shapes to create more interesting looking trees. Because we're not out to copy here, we're out to create interest. And the more we can design it to make a better shapes in the trees, better value separation, more color, the more interesting it'll be. So my first step here, and here by using, and it helps to start with the dark. When I start with the dark, that kind of sets up the shape. And you can see, when you look at this, you can sense the light direction right away. I know the light's coming this way because I've really separated the light and dark. And that sounds simplistic, but it's really important to set that up because most of the photographs, you know, when I look at these trees here, if I just cut that out, it's kind of hard to tell which way the light's coming. But in the whole photograph, I can sense it by some of the trees being a little lighter on one side or the other. But I want to push it even more. More definite sunlit side, definite shadow side. So I'll lose some of the little lights in the shadow area, and I'll lose some of the tiny little darks in the light area and create a definite separation. Then, again, the halftones in the lights, a little bit of color variation. Here I added some muted red just to gray the green down some because not all those needles on the trees are just a bright yellow-green. A lot of them sometimes are faded or dying or a little bit more red in them. And that tempers down that real strong green. Then in the shadow, I have the darker dark in here, the lighter dark. And I want to keep that fairly simple, but using the negative shape here and these negative sky holes in the tree, that really helps give the tree more shape. If the shadow side was all filled in with dark, no sky holes or holes where you see the background, kind of leaves the trees a little bit shapeless. But I'm real careful to design, again, especially on the shadow side, the shapes here. Simplifying, creating more in and out. I don't want equal on both sides all the time. Real definite. I'm also doing brush strokes that are more this way. Sometimes, I can go along the edge different directions, but I'm usually doing slanted, somewhat slanted horizontal strokes to show these branches. I don't want to get them all real straight because that would look static, so kind of angle them a little bit. But again, 2 or 3 values in the light, a couple of values in the dark, sky holes, background holes, negative shape to kind of shape them up a little bit more. Same thing on this side. I really created a lot more contrast, more separation of dark and light on the left side here. I really separated that. Designed trees that are going to show you more of the sense of light, which I like this version better than the camera version. It's just too broken up, too little spots of dark and light everywhere. There's no, it doesn't look like paint, which it isn't. It's a photograph. I just don't want my painting to look like a photograph. Looking at a few paintings here, this is a painting by Hanson Putoff. Here he does, the light direction is backlit. The light's coming from this way. And it's really just hitting the edge of the trees here. You see there's not much light. So most of his tree technique here is the shape. Really varying the shape here. No negative shape there, coming in and out. Careful not to make it kind of static, where it's equal on both sides. Very definite shapes on these trees. Again, there's not a lot of strong dark and light because it's backlit and not much light is hitting the trees. But here he's focusing more on the shadow because that's what he has most of. The key there is the shape, varying the shape to make it more interesting because it doesn't have a lot of strong light on it, like he does on the hills. Hills have a lot of strong light, the trees don't. So that shape of the shadow that you start with, probably the most important as far as how the tree's going to look. And this is a painting by William Wendt. He was very angular with his trees, a definite dark, definite light, and he just separated them, period. He didn't worry about softening edges, at least not in this painting. He does in others, but not a lot. And it really gives that strong shape of the trees, and some well-placed negative holes in there to show the background really helps give the tree a lot of shape. So don't hurry through just getting a shape down there. It's real important to make it really well designed. Like tree shape over here, negative shape of the sky hole there, or the background coming through, and the hole there really designs that tree pretty well. So simplify, simple dark, simple light. Then you can add some other values. He's got a couple of values in the dark, a couple of values in the light, and that's about it. And then the negative shape to help shape up at the tree. So another William Wendt. I know I've used this one a lot, but you can really see the light direction. And again, carefully designed shape. Probably used what he saw as well as what he knows and what he wants it to look like. He's not a slave to what he's looking at there. Same thing with the shadow shape. Very definite. You can see it comes in on the shadow side, goes out on the light side. It's not equal on both sides. Same thing with the pine trees here. It's got a definite shape and the trunk kind of over on the left side. But really careful with designing that shape. And the simpler you can keep it, I think the better it's going to work. Now we need some detail. We need at least 2 values in the light and 2 values in the dark, if not 3. And a little bit of color variation within each one to create more interest. But keep it simple. Here's some Edgar Payne trees. And again, it's that designed shape here. And obviously I wasn't standing there when he was painting, but the trees did not probably look like that. He's made them look better. You have to design the tree to make it work better in your painting, not just copy it from a photograph or if you're outside as you see it. And you can see the negative shapes here are real important to creating the overall sense of shape in the tree. So don't forget the negative shape too. It really helps set up the trees. But the trees aren't the same. They're all varied. They're all simple dark and light with a little bit of color variation in both the dark and the light. One more Edgar Payne here. Here you can really see the definite dark shape, light shape. And again, that careful designing the overall shape. I don't know what kind of trees these are, but it's kind of the odd shape maybe that made him stop and paint it. A nice grouping of the trees. And again, that negative few, it's got 5 or 6 negative shapes in there to make the trees work better, to make them have a more definite shape. Without the sky holes there, or the negative shapes, it doesn't work as well. So don't forget those. But also remember, just because 1 or 2 or 3 sky holes look good, that doesn't mean 25 sky holes will. Fewer is always better in this case. So I usually pull some together to create maybe larger sky holes and just place them varying shapes where I think they help the shape of the tree. Carlson has a real good chapter on trees on his Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. I would suggest reading that. Really good good chapter on trees. Gives you a little bit better understanding of them.